Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. I wanted to start off this video with an expression of happy pride, especially to all of my fellow members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community. I will be having some pride-informed content on my channel coming up this month, including celebrating decks by queer creators and talking about queer representation later on. But this is a video about books. So I wanted to share a little bit about my reading and my reading going forward. And specifically, I wanted to give an update on my book Stack of Shame. So if you haven't heard of the book Stack of Shame, I'll leave a link to my video where I explain what I'm talking about. But briefly, the idea of the book Stack of Shame was that before I allow myself to buy any new books in calendar year 2020, I would read the books that as of the end of 2019 were sitting on my shelf unread, that I had bought with every intention of reading cover to cover, but hadn't. And so there were 10 books on that list. And I am proud to say that I have completed in spirit the book Stack of Shame. I have read 8 out of the 10 books, so you'll see that I've changed the rules on myself a little bit, but I am counting myself successful here, and it was a part of my depth year to do this, and it was a good experience. I'm glad that I made a point of reading those books that I had sitting in my collection. I'm glad that I read them all. And something that I'm going to take coming forward from this is the idea of always having my unread books separate in one place so that they don't get mixed in, because I have a lot of books in my house. I have a lot of bookshelves in my house. And books can easily get lost in amongst the books I have read. So I'm keeping all of my unread books in a pile from now on, but I'm not going to call it a book stack of shame, because I think having a stack of books to read is a great thing. So why am I counting myself successful when I've only read 8 out of the 10 is probably what you're wondering. I have made the decision to move on from the book stack of shame, despite having one book completely remaining unread and one that I've just started. And so I thought here I would just explain why I have not finished those 2 books, but I'm still counting myself successful on the book Stack of Shame. So the first one, which I've started but I'm not finished yet, is the Complete Lenormand Oracle Handbook by Kathleen Matthews. This book is my main Learning Lenormand resource, which I'm working on this year. I also have some deck guidebooks that I'm working with, but this is the main book. It's really excellent. There are a lot of exercises in it, but it's not a linear read, and it's not a thing that I feel like should be rushed. I think if anything, it would be a little bit contrary to the spirit of the depth year, where I'm investing time and going deeper with things, to just blast through this book cover to cover so I can check it off on the list for the book Stack of Shame. So I'm going to keep working with this book. I'll certainly have finished it by the end of 2020, I have no doubt, but I'm not preventing myself from buying any new books of any sort just because I'm not done this, because I know that what that would do is incline me to race through this and get less out of it. So I'll be continuing to work on that book. The other book, which I have not yet started, but do still intend to read, is The Elements of Magic, Reclaiming Earth, Air, Fire, Water, Spirit, edited by Jane Meredith and Gade Parma. And this is a book about magic in the reclaiming tradition of witchcraft. And specifically, just reading from the back of the book here, this empowering book provides spells, exercises, practices, and perspectives that are taught in reclaiming's foundational class, Elements of Magic. So, this book really appealed to me. I believe I first heard of it on a book review by my friend Cara at CuteWitch772 on YouTube, and I wanted to check out this book. I'm exploring aspects of the reclaiming tradition right now and finding it really interesting, and this book really appealed to me. Plus, this cover is gorgeous. That helps too. But what I learned is that this class, the foundational class, Elements of Magic, that this book is based on, actually has prerequisite reading, or very, very strongly recommended reading that you complete before you take the class. And that reading is Starhawk's book, The Spiral Dance, A Rebirth of the Ancient Religion of the Great Goddess. And I work in education. I'm a fan of prerequisites. I'm a fan of reading things in order. I tell my students as much. So I'm going to take my own advice and read this first. I'm reading this currently in a group facilitated by Cara at CuteWitch772 through her Discord, which is attached to her Patreon. So we're reading this one, a handful of us, and we're reading it quite slowly. It has a lot of exercises in it. We want to take some time with it. So we're reading like 1 to 2 chapters a month, depending on how long or involved those chapters are. And so we're taking our time. So again, I'm not going to just breeze through the Elements of Magic book just because it was on the list. I think that it's better to save it and read in order. But I am working my way to it by reading the Starhawk book first. So that is why, despite it being kind of a cheat, I'm counting myself as done the book Stack of Shame, despite having only read 8 of the 10 books. But I'm pretty pleased with that. It's been good. And I'm happy to be constructing a new stack, which is great. I love looking at books and shopping for books and buying books. So I will have no shortage of reading material for the year. That's for sure. So in terms of my reading going forward, I wanted to share an idea that I found on a list, which has been making the rounds, called 75 Things White People Can Do for Racial Justice. And I'm going to link below that list. And lots of these lists of anti-racist resources have been going around lately, which is great. And I think that it needs to keep going, right? Having all of these resources related to anti-racism going around and having conversations about anti-racism and doing anti-racist work can never just be, post for a week and go back to normal, make one video and never talk about racism or anti-racism again. It's ongoing work. So in the spirit of that, I was reading that post, and number 38 on that list, number 38 at the time that I'm posting this, I think the numbers change because the list gets things added and subtracted, but number 38 is a post by Ali Henny, which is a Facebook post, which I'll also link below so you can go straight to it, on 4 things you can do to decolonize your bookshelf this year. So in my reading going forward, I'm going to be informed by this set of suggestions. And so that's also going to be informing my book updates and sharing book suggestions and recommendations and books to read on my channel as well. So reading Ali Henny's post, there's 4 ideas for decolonizing your bookshelf this year. The first idea: add books written by Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. Try to add at least 1 book from an author of color for every book written by a white person that you buy this year. So I'm going to do that. And there's no shortage of books by authors of color that are on my to-read list. So that one, I'm going to aim for more than 1 actually, because 1 book from an author of color for every book written by a white person is kind of where I'm at right now in terms of the 35 books that I've read so far this year. So I'm going to aim higher than that. I'm a big proponent of diverse reading and reading diverse authors, and also own voices reading. For folks who haven't heard of that, own voices is a tag that started in the young adult fiction area, but I think applies elsewhere as well. And an own voices book is basically one in which the protagonist or main character of the book and the author share a marginalized identity. So it's a book that is self-representation, right? As opposed to just representation by someone else, which can be sometimes problematic or stereotypical or tokenizing, right? So own voices is about self-representation. So in my fiction reading, I'm very much interested in that. And that applies to things other than race as well. So ability or sexuality, for example, gender identity. The second suggestion from Ali Henny's post is purge books that are racist or written by problematic authors. The goal isn't to run away from alternative viewpoints or ideas with which we disagree, but these should not be the dominant voices in your library. There are some beloved works that are racist trash and belong in university libraries where they can be studied for the trash that they are, and not in our personal collections. This is something that I have done, in the past. I have done the book Purge. The mention she makes in the university libraries in some ways kind of applies to my home bookshelf because I work in university education. So there are some books, that I certainly would not say are unproblematic politically, but that I refer to in my work, right? So I can't bring myself to purge Plato. I need to refer to Plato, right? But in terms of my pleasure reading or reading fiction, absolutely, 100%. Third point is don't pigeonhole authors of color. Black, brown, and Indigenous people can do more than talk about race. Pick books from your favorite genre written by authors of color. And then the fourth one, which I'll just read at the same time. The fourth point that she mentions is don't hold authors of color to a higher standard. Not every book written by a Black, brown, or Indigenous author will automatically be great, and that's 100% okay. You can have mediocre or crappy books written by white authors. You can also have some mediocre books from people of color on your shelves too. So, 100%. In terms of this piece about not pigeonholing authors, I think, it's really great right now that a lot of reading lists are going around that include books focused on anti-racism, include books focused on, learning to understand racism and how it operates and how to interrupt it when we see it, right? But these are not the only books by authors of color that we should be reading, right? What about fiction? What about memoirs? What about science fiction and fantasy, which is most of the fiction that I read, right? Absolutely reading authors of color across genres matters, and supporting authors of color matters. There's been lots of great posts circulating on Instagram, which I'm sure folks have seen, about supporting Black-owned booksellers, and I have a link below that I'm going to include, which is a roundup of resources compiled by WeNeedDiverseBooks, a nonprofit. And in that list, which is called Resources for Race, Equity, and Inclusion, they have a list of Black-owned bookstores, I believe specifically in the United States. So when you're shopping, you can check that out. It's also great, I think, to buy books directly from the publishers because it shows demand and establishes for publishers that there is a demand for works by diverse authors. And I would say, if you borrow books from the library, that's great too, right? Ali Henny's post talking about decolonizing your bookshelf is talking about a physical bookshelf. But I think that the principles of decolonizing the bookshelf apply to ebooks and can apply to library books as well. And I think that that's a great way to show libraries that there's community demand for books by authors of color and books by diverse authors as well. So my reading list going forward is going to be informed by these goals. And so I'm going to also be sharing books accordingly. So I love talking about books on this channel. Folks know sometimes those are tarot books, often they're not. I talk about a lot of science fiction and fantasy as well, which are my favorite fiction genres. And going forward, my channel talking about the books that I've read and doing book reviews is going to include at least half of being books by authors of color. And before I sign off here, I just wanted to mention, if folks are looking for some great books to read, an anarchist publisher called PM Press, which I quite like, has compiled a book list of books that they've published called Black Liberation and Visions of Abolition reading list. And they've got a big sale, 40% off all of those books. And that includes ebooks, which are already quite affordable. So I'm going to link below to PM Press's website where you can find these books available. Many of them, they're focusing on anti-racism, focusing on prison abolition as well. Important conversations happening right now. So do check out those books. I will share more about the books that I have been reading going forward. And I think what I'm going to do, and you can tell me in the comments if you think that this is a good idea, is in future, instead of just doing here's the books I've been reading, maybe sort them a little bit. So have a video on fiction I've been reading and have a book, nonfiction, for example, just because I feel like, some folks may be very interested in one and not at all interested in the other. So I think that that's what I'm going to do in terms of my reading going forward. I have been reading some great books. I am looking forward to sharing with you in a future video. But for now, I will leave it here. And yeah, Book Stack of Shame, successful, or at least successful in spirit, if not to the letter, successful in spirit. And looking forward to doing so much reading going forward. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you again later.